Hi everyone, it's Martin coming back from Knoxville, Tennessee, where we had the Beach Talk fly-in over the weekend. Great event. This is a somewhat typical mid-range cross-country for me, 500 and some miles. Not the longest, not the shortest, something I've done a fair number of times in the Bonanza. In Knoxville, I spoke with a gentleman who takes cross-country flying and long-distance flying to a level that is far beyond what I have done. Few have attempted what he has accomplished, and even fewer have succeeded. His name is Bill Harrelson.
And I told you that on this flight I figured out the secret of life, didn't I?
No.
No? I did.
And here's my conversation with Bill about the airplane, the Lancair that he built for long-distance flying, and of course about some of the flights that he has made in this airplane.
Bill Harrelson. Rapidly what? I'm here with Bill Harrelson. Bill is the holder of at least 2 world records in flying that I know of.
Only 2.
Only 2. Well, it's 2 more than I have. It's the longest flight ever in a piston-powered airplane.
The actual name of the record is Distance Class C-1.d. And what that means is the FAI, which is the keeper of aviation records since 1905, has different classes. C means land plane as opposed to amphibian or seaplane. 1 is internal engine as opposed to turbojet or electric or rocket. And D is the weight class. Let's see, 1,500 to 3,000 kilograms, I believe, is D, a weight class. So.
And that flight took you from Guam to Florida?
To Jacksonville, Florida, yeah.
Florida. 7,000 miles? Something like that?
Yeah, a little more than 7,000 nauticals.
Yeah. And the other flight you're known for is the flight around the Earth across both poles.
Right, yeah, that's the name, actual official name of that record, Speed Around the World Over Both the Earth's Poles.
I'm curious how you got into flying, how you got into records, and if that happened about the same time. Did you fly to create records? Or?
No, I started flying when I was 15 and learned to fly in high school, bag groceries every day after school, and on Sunday I'd take all that large fortune and go down and buy a flying lesson at the local airport.
Yeah.
And I was flight instructing for a living summer out of high school. Mm-hmm. So I had been flying for a long, long time before I started thinking about records.
Mm-hmm. Did you fly for the military?
No, all civilian.
All civilian. But so your airline career started.
Did a lot of flight instructing and charter and the typical route up, and ended up at American Airlines. Yeah.
When anyone prepares for a record flight, you mentioned the different classes already. Can you talk a little bit about the structure, the process for that? Who do you announce your intention with to do a record flight? What information is provided? Who oversees the flight to validate at the end that the record is real?
As I mentioned, the FAI, Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, based in Switzerland, is the keeper of the records, and the U.S. branch of that is the NAA, National Aeronautic Association. So, first of all, what you can't do, what you cannot do if you want to set a record is fly real high or fly real fast or fly real far, whatever kind of record you want to do, and then call them up and say, hey, here's what I did, give me the record. It won't work. All this has to be sanctioned ahead of time. There is, like for both my records, there were literally a book of rules that you need to follow, and points have to be declared. The airplane has to be officially weighed by an official of the NAA. So there's a lot of preparation. Okay, so if someone was interested in it, first thing to do is join the NAA, get a sporting license, which is just something they issue to you upon application and payment of a few bucks. And then start, a lot of information's on the website, on the NAA and the FAI website, and you can look and see who holds, if anyone, the record that you're interested in and what it would take to beat it, and then come up with your strategy and work with an accredited NAA observer. Take it from there.
Now the airplane you fly is a Lancair that you built yourself?
Yeah, my wife and I built it, Lancair IV.
not your typical Lancair, I'm sure.
We built it right from the ground up specifically for these records, but specifically the polar record, and that was our ultimate goal. So, although nothing's impossible if you throw enough money at it, it would be very difficult to create an aircraft, convert an aircraft to do the kind of things this has done from an already flying aircraft.
So your airplane was, from the start, was selected, modified and built specifically for the flight around the poles?
Yes.
Range obviously is a big factor.
Yes.
Are there other considerations besides range that you can talk about?
Ours is basically an electric airplane, no vacuum, and so considering the mission, we didn't think one electrical system would be prudent, so we built three. So we have 3 alternators, 3 batteries, 3 completely separate and independent electrical systems, and those can be cross-tied in different ways. And 2 buses power the avionics through Schottky diodes, and all 3 buses power the essential bus and all kinds of things like that. So we kind of designed it basically after the 727 electrical system. That's what I use for a kind of a rough blueprint.
Is the 727 the airplane you flew in your career?
Yeah, flew it early on, back in the olden days. Fuel is the big one, as you correctly pointed out. And every airplane has plenty of room for more fuel. Every airplane. What every airplane doesn't have is plenty of CG envelope for more fuel. So the key from the beginning was getting the empty CG forward. So we moved the engine forward. We built a header tank that goes from the right side of the instrument panel to the firewall. The engine runs just off that header tank. When it's in the what we call the expedition configuration, the one-place configuration for these records, there's no rudder pedals, no co-pilot seat. That's fuel all the way up toward the firewall. And all that's ahead of the empty CG. That moves the CG forward. And then there's a backseat tank, a backseat footwell tank, and two bladder tanks. So, and all total in that configuration, the one-place configuration, it can hold 361 gallons. And standard Lancair is 80-something gallons. So it's a lot of extra gas.
What total takeoff weight do you get when you load it up with 361 gallons?
About 4,800 pounds, which is about 50% over the Lancair recommended max gross weight.
361 gallons. How did you end up with that number? Was that how much you could fit into the CG envelope? Was that the limit, or
yeah? Well, we knew, from just calculating our anticipated performance and anticipated fuel flow, how much we would need for that trip. So we thought we would need closer to 400 gallons, and so we just kept building it as much as we could. Testing, once the airplane was finished, showed that the performance was better and the fuel flow was less. So 361 gallons looked like it would be adequate, and in fact was adequate.
Okay. So
breakfast experience. You don't just get to eat it, you experience it.
Sounds so much better already, yeah.
Yeah, that alone makes it worth $14.50.
So on these flights, you were the person that is famous at the end. You're the one that gets the visibility, but a lot of other people help.
Oh yeah,
in preparation and in conducting.
I try to emphasize when I make my little talks about the trip that it was a team effort. I mean, I actually had the easy part. I just had to sit on my butt, for long periods of time. But there was a team of people, including Kurt Larson, Sven's brother, and a lot of people helped build the airplane, all my neighbors and friends, and on the trip itself, we had 6 people that were monitoring the flight. Always 2 people would be monitoring the flight, and they'd have schedules and shifts. Always one would go off halfway through the other one's shift, so you wouldn't have fresh people, 2 fresh people, and they were monitoring on spider tracks the flight. Every 60 seconds they could get a hit on Google Earth to see my position, my ground speed, my altitude, my course, and they could see weather, relay that to me. We built in a satellite comm system in the airplane, another modification. We built into the tail the SATCOM antenna. So they helped a tremendous amount, especially concerning weather. They could look at satellite weather out in the ocean and give me suggestions as to deviations, and probably saved my butt several times.
Yeah, weather, besides weather, are there other functions, other roles that they had that were important for the mission?
Sure. We had arranged all the permits and all that kind of stuff well ahead of time. However, there were some unexpected changes. For instance, when I got to the South Pole, we had much higher headwinds than anticipated, and the fuel situation at the pole wasn't looking that good. So instead of continuing over the pole to from Punta Arenas over the pole to New Zealand, went to the pole, turned around, and came back to South America.
Yes, we are. What would you like?
I was just going to get a buffet, I guess.
Okay. I'd like to try your Eggs Benedict, please.
Hungry.
Thank you.
Really? Eggs Benedict? I'll take the same.
Okay.
All right, two Eggs Benedict.
We'll leave this here.
So weather and then logistics, and you talked about the headwind over the South Pole.
Oh yeah, yeah. So since Hamilton, New Zealand was a declared point, once you declare a point, you have to reach that point. Yeah. But I didn't have to go back to the pole because I had reached the pole. So then, how to get to Hamilton, New Zealand? We looked at going direct, but the same weather and headwinds that made us turn around would have been a problem going direct. So we ended up going through Tahiti, and getting the permits there turned out to be a problem. That was a last-minute change, and so the ground team worked very hard on that. So things like that, and arranging fuel in Tahiti. The places we had planned to go and laid the groundwork for all went smoothly. It was just changes like that made it a little more difficult.
I can imagine if you need something in a rush that you didn't anticipate, and figuring out how do you deal with this country.
Especially, Tahiti, a small French country like Tahiti. We decided on that. We found fuel there which is not normally available. We found barrels of fuel in Tahiti, and we worked out a flight plan, fueled the airplane up, and I was literally walking out to the airplane when the operations people came after me and said, "Hey, we got a message from Tahiti," and they refused the flight plan and said, "No, we need 72 hours to issue a permit." So that 3 days that set us back there, and that was very, very disappointing and unexpected.
If I remember correctly, you flew over the South Pole during the summer on the southern hemisphere, right? So you had
right.
Daylight there.
Did both poles in January.
When you flew over the South Pole, what were some of the sites?
Well, at the South Pole itself, there's the Amundsen Scott Station, U.S. research base, which looks like a giant junkyard at the end of the world. And so I did make a few circles around that, take a bunch of pictures. Antarctica itself, I had been studying it for years and years in preparation for this trip, but the first time you lay your eyes on Antarctica, it was just unbelievable. The mountains coming right up out of the sea, and beautiful, stark, scary place.
How high are the elevations that you have to deal with there?
The route that I took, the mountains on Alexander Island were about 10,000 feet. The highest elevation in Antarctica is, I'll think of the name of it in a second, it's about 14,000 feet. Vincent Massif is the highest elevation. The South Pole itself it's flat, just a plain, but it's 9,300 feet. The North Pole, however, also in January, a few days later, was not such a great sight.
That was a different story.
Yeah.
It must have been just pitch black, right?
That's right. Yeah. It was a dot on the GPS.
Yes. And from losing the last daylight on your way north to seeing first signs of daylight again? How many hours was
That was about 20 hours. So very long, cold night.
Yeah. Was that the most intimidating part of the journey?
Yes, probably so. I had a couple of times when I had serious doubts about the successful outcome, and that was certainly one of them. And it was due to the engine temperatures. We had the winter before, we had picked what was forecast to be the coldest day of the year, and took off from did some cold weather testing. Took off from where we live in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and went up to International Falls and out the Canadian border into North Dakota, and all in one flight. Flew in those temperatures, which were Arctic temperatures, 35, 40 below, and then turned around and came back home and landed in Fredericksburg again. Everything went well. The engine temperatures were good. We thought we had done adequate testing there. What we failed to consider was flying around for 2 hours or so in those kind of temperatures versus being in them for 12 and 14, 15 hours was a whole different thing. The engine just slowly kept getting cold soaked. Really? And the oil temperature, got down to 70 degrees. The oil pressure was up above the red line, and we really started worrying about the engine. The cylinder head temperatures were down in the 100s. Pretty cold engine.
Yes. Were you able to stay warm in the cockpit for
I was able to stay warm myself, yes. One of the things we did when we built it was, instead of just having the normal heater, which is not very effective anyway, as most airplanes aren't, blow into the cabin, we kept it on a scat tube. And of course I had, for the polar legs, I had a lot of layers on, a lot of goose down, and long underwear, all kinds of stuff. But I could take that scat tube and put it up under my jacket and kind of puff with warm air. So I personally was never uncomfortably cold. Just the engine was. Yeah.
That's probably a good time to talk about emergencies. You have examples of contingency plans, that you could have exercised if needed?
There are a couple of places to land in Antarctica, several of which would be landing only. You'd never get out. But in a life-threatening emergency, there would be places basically to crash. Most of them are skiways, so with a non-ski equipped airplane, you just basically crash where somebody else might be around.
Yes.
But a lot of the emergency planning we did, especially in the polar regions, the amount of emergency gear to survive there would have been a tremendous amount to actually survive, and the likelihood of a rescue quickly is very, very small. It would have been, if you got rescued at all, it would have been many days. So we kept running, the conversation went, well, should we take another 6 pounds of survival gear or another gallon of gas? And the gallon of gas kept winning. So we took very minimal survival gear, knowing that if something did happen up there, I wouldn't have survived. That was pretty much a given. So that was kind of a conscious, wouldn't have been a surprise.
I'm sure that's not a decision that everyone would make, but I'm glad to hear that you thought about it consciously before.
Yeah, thought about it for years. That discussion, survival gear versus fuel versus weight, went on for years. And we ended up just taking as much fuel as we could, and very minimal survival gear. I had a one-man life raft, a small ditching kit. That's about it.
Yeah. It was probably not an easy time or an easy conversation with your wife and your family, because I understand your wife is a pilot too, right?
Oh yeah.
So she was part of the planning.
Oh yeah, she was head of the ground team. Yeah.
Probably very aware of the risks that.
Yeah. Is your life insurance paid up?
So speaking of record flights again, you are the only person that I've met face to face who is a record holder of this kind, of an official record. But there must be several others trying these things too, right? is there like a community of pilots that attempt records? Do you exchange information? Is it more collaboration or more a stiff competition? Or
no,
how can we imagine that?
I'd say it's collaboration, and I'll give you an example of that. The first record I ever attempted was in our little Lancair 320, and it was an efficiency record. And so I attempted to fly a very long flight around a big high pressure area, about a 24-hour flight. Figure the longer time I was aloft and not climbing, would help the efficiency. And the NAA official who was assigned to oversee my flight was the holder of that record, and he just bent over backwards to help me and tell me what he found out on his trips. And so it's definitely more collaborative. Most of it is too serious and life-threatening to try to keep any good information to yourself. So everybody seems to share it well. And for long distance, ultra long distance records, to things like the Earth Rounders, who have a website, they're all very, very happy to help you. And here it's a good place. Customs is quick here. Customs is bad here. Don't go there. Things like that.
For any pilot who is trying to explore that kind of long distance flying, whether for a world record or just flying around the world, do you have any suggestions for how to get started?
Probably the best way to get started, and kind of dip your toe into the record world, is a point-to-point record. So you can set a national record in your Cessna 150, from between two cities, perhaps, that nobody has attempted to set the speed record before. So that's a good way to kind of get your foot in. You actually get a record, and usually when people do that, it encourages them. They see how the system works, and then they go for more challenging records, perhaps.
Yeah. Understand the process.
Yeah, exactly.
What it takes.
Right.
You had a successful airline career. You've been flying for a long time before you did these long flights with a lot of thought, with a purpose-built aircraft. Every now and then we read about people that try to set a new unofficial record, if you will, for being the youngest person to fly something, whether it's around the world or here comes food.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm curious, now that you look back to a long, successful flying career with many highlights, would you encourage young people to attempt something like this, or is this something?
No, I would certainly encourage young people to have a record as a goal and work toward getting the experience and the knowledge to get it. But as far as just doing it to be the youngest, I think that's a really bad idea. First of all, there is no world record for the youngest anything in aviation. And neither the NAA or the FAI recognize any such record, so it's made up records. And it leads to things like the little girl Jessica trying to be the youngest to fly across the country several years ago, flying into a thunderstorm. And there's been other attempts that I know about that have just, some have actually been successful. One guy made it around the world, the last guy to try it, but just the mistakes he made, avoidable mistakes, if he had had the experience and the knowledge and the background, or had done the research. But he didn't. He just was in a hurry to do it, to be the youngest, and frankly, lucky to be alive. Totaled his airplane. Hail damage.
Yeah. I guess on a flight like this, more than any other flight, you may have to deal with situations that are very much out of the ordinary, and the more experience you have, the better you're prepared for that.
Sure. And international flying in general is different. I mean, you go get your private and commercial and instrument rating, and really not really taught much about international flying. And there's a whole lot to it, a lot of nuances and things. And you need to volunteer to be somebody's co-pilot on a North Atlantic trip. Something like that to get your feet in it, rather than just jumping into it without the background. and knowledge. It's there's a lot more to it that is difficult to absorb that kind of knowledge other than doing it with somebody that has the experience.
Was your international airline flying helpful for that at all, or is that too different to apply?
No. It's that was helpful. I mean, a position report's a position report. You know, whether you're flying a 777 or a Bonanza. You know, it's all the same, and a lot of it's the same. But I'd flown Learjets internationally also before the airlines, and did a lot of worldwide stuff there. And of course, had flown light airplanes. You know, the Bahamas and Canada and South America, stuff like that. So I worked into it gradually.
Yeah. Well, I think we should enjoy our Eggs Benedict before they get cold.
You know, maybe you didn't, but the polar record flight, that was second attempt. I had a first attempt 2 years earlier that failed.
I did not know that. No. How far did you get, and what caused you to abort?
Got to Punta Arenas, Chile, southern tip of South America. What we had done is we had looked at when should we do this, you know, and most people would say, well, do the South Pole in January, December, January, maybe early February. Do the North Pole in June. So we studied the climate for years all around the world on our route, and in fact, the best time to do South Pole is middle of winter, North Pole early summer. But we kind of figured that the best all-around compromise, the thunderstorms in the tropics and stuff like that, would have been around the equinox. So we picked March to do that, and as it turns out, that was a mistake because March was too late. When I got to Punta Arenas, Chile, I waited for acceptable weather to cross the Southern Ocean to Antarctica, and it just never came. And that late in the season, it was essentially winter in Antarctica by then. So we figured out that everything needed to be skewed toward that South Pole leg, toward the Antarctica leg. So the second attempt, we did it in January. We did everything in January.
So the South Pole determined the timing.
Yeah. And actually, January was a very good time to do the North Pole too. I mean, it's all dark, but the weather is, and predictably was, perfect. I mean, when it's 40, 45 below zero, there ain't no weather, you know.
Are you aware of anyone who has since then tried to beat you in this particular discipline?
Not in my weight class. A friend of mine, Michel Gordillo, Spanish guy, has done the polar record in one weight class under mine, C-1.d. He did it in an RV, which I think is a whole lot more impressive than my record. You know, he didn't have nearly the range I had. So he was successful with that, and you know, I helped him a little bit, as much as I could on that. You know, things like HF antennas, and we talked about, you know, various other aspects of the trip. We had both set that as a goal. We had he and I had talked at an Earth Rounders meeting in Mexico City many years prior, and we both had that as a very long-term goal, and luckily both succeeded.
Are there other records, or shall we say non-standard missions or flights that you're thinking of, that you're preparing for?
Yes.
All right. Guess we'll talk again in a few years and see how that turned out.
Yeah, we're thinking about one more. But records like that aren't particularly fun. It's a lot of work. It's not really fun at all. I mean, it's a great accomplishment, and I'm proud of what we did and our team and all that stuff. But as far as, oh, this is going to be a great time, it's not. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
a lot of work. More so for the ground team, and the flying itself is, you know, spending 25, 35 hours in an airplane nonstop is a lot of work. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I guess that's true for records, you know, not just with flying and aviation, right? Whether you're an athlete or a hiker.
Yeah.
If you want to do something that special, it's a lot of preparation, a lot of work, a lot of pain, a lot of risk often.
Yeah.
But that's what it's part of being human, right? Is to try to reach for these things.
Yeah. People ask me, why do you do this? And the answer is adventure, which I think is a necessary component of everybody's life. I mean, that adventure doesn't necessarily mean, climbing Mount Everest. For some people, the adventure could be going to the library.
Yeah.
But I think everybody needs some adventure in their life, and it's up to you to define for yourself what constitutes that adventure. But so for me, this constituted it, either that or a midlife crisis. I'm not sure which.
Well, I agree. Adventure comes at many different levels.
Yeah.
But a little bit of that is a very healthy thing to have for everyone.
Yeah. Kind of my definition of adventure is something where the outcome is not certain. Something where you don't really know what's going to happen. So that can cover a walk around the block or a trip to the moon.
What kind of flights or flying do you enjoy outside of preparing for records? Do you still instruct? Do you use it to travel much? Or what's a typical flight?
We
if
travel a
there's
lot.
Such a thing for you?
Well, what kind of flying do I enjoy? All kinds. I don't think I've ever had a flight that I haven't enjoyed. We have, my wife built a little Rand's Coyote. You familiar with that?
No.
It's like a Kit Fox type, little Rotax engine, tube and fabric, just putt around, 80-mile-an-hour airplane. And, we fly that around, and that's a lot of fun. A lot of fun just to go low and slow, so enjoy that. My wife and I enjoy taking trips in the Lancair. We fly it all over the country. We took a vacation a couple of years ago, and we went to Hawaii, spent a couple of weeks in Hawaii, in Molokai, and the Big Island, and I went to Christmas Island, a place not a lot of people get to see, pretty primitive. Went to Rarotonga, really neat place. Spent a week in Rarotonga. Went to a week or 10 days. Went to New Zealand, spent a month in New Zealand. Flew all around there. Went to Australia, spent a month there. And so we take short trips, long trips, we enjoy them all.
Do you ever just take an airline flight somewhere because it's easier, or do you try to fly the Lancair whenever possible?
The answer to the first part of the question is no. I've been retired from the airline for 14 years and haven't been on one yet. I hope I don't.
I don't have the airplane, the experience, and really not the desire to make these very long flights in my own airplane. So when I go to Germany to visit family there, and whenever I travel for work, which is about once or twice a month, they force me to fly the airlines. They don't allow me to use my plane.
However, you got a Bonanza. That's a perfectly capable airplane of going to Europe. Maybe you ought to think about that as a goal. It's quite doable in a Bonanza. Getting to Europe can be done in a bunch of 700-mile legs.
I understand it's doable, and the legs are not terribly long. But still, the price, the cost of failure, if you're ditching in the North Atlantic, is something that I'm not sure I'm ready to accept as an outcome.
That's reasonable and good thinking. However, I would submit to you that any of us, every single time we fly, we are over areas that we would not survive a landing. Whether that's taking off and being over a city or something like that, we don't think about that. We don't think about flying over the forest, where we're going to die if we go down in the forest. Very, very likely. But boy, you fly over that little lake and whew, geez, that's water, you know. Probably have a much better chance of surviving a water landing than many off-field landings.
Yeah, that's a valid thought. And if I think of taking off in Chicago Midway, which I've done many times,
Okay.
if I lose the engine there right after takeoff, that's...
Yep.
And worse yet, I'll probably do a lot of damage on the ground too when I get there.
True. And just think of what a great YouTube video that'd make. Here I am flying to Europe. And the thing is, in a little airplane, if your goal is to get to Europe, you know, unless you're a ferry pilot doing it professionally, you probably have the wrong goal. The goal should be the experience, the trip, and spend some time in Arctic Canada, spend some time we went to a bunch of places in Greenland. Greenland's just fascinating.
That would certainly have to be part of it.
Yeah.
And also, I know I would thoroughly enjoy flying my Bonanza in Europe once I'm there.
Yeah.
Not just to get there, but, you know, I mean, that used to be my home.
Right.
You know, just thinking of taking it back to the grass strip where I learned to fly gliders, 30 some years ago. That's a very encouraging thought in this.
I can see the seed has been planted.
It's something I've thought about.
Yeah, good. Well, let me know if I can help.
So I think the only thing that I'm curious about that we haven't covered yet is sponsorship. I mean, these flights cannot be cheap. The preparation you're conducting them has got to be quite expensive, and I'm curious if you have companies supporting you in that, or what your thoughts are on sponsorship. Just trying to think about pros and cons of this. I can come up with some good reasons why you maybe wouldn't want to do it.
There are a lot of reasons not to do it, not to get sponsors. We had thought about exactly those things and kind of studied it, and I studied a lot of the famous record setters back from the 30s, you know, Lindbergh and all that stuff. And what I've seen is that a sponsor can get you into trouble. My closest competitor on the polar leg in my weight class was a guy named Hans Schmidt, H.G. Schmidt. Very smart guy, very experienced guy, retired Swiss Air captain, held the eastbound and the westbound around the world records, so not new to record setting. And he wanted to do the polar trip, and he had sponsors and had a contract with the sponsors to have his airplane and him in Oshkosh. And of course, like everybody else who builds an airplane, you're always behind schedule, you never finish it. And so he ended up pushing beyond what I think he should have as far as testing and taking his tests in too large in increments, working up to the heavy weight. And he took off from Basel, Switzerland, destination Oshkosh, and he made it about a mile, killed himself. And that, you know, I certainly will not say it's the sponsor's fault, but that's the kind of pressure that, you know, sponsors can put on you to do things that you probably wouldn't do. I mean, a smart guy like that, an experienced guy like that, probably would have done a lot more incremental testing. So, and the guys in the 30s, it was the same thing. The sponsors, you know, had demands. Also, what you might get from the sponsors, here's a set of headphones, you know, here's a watch, they're not going to give you $50,000. You know, it's just,
Thank you.
unless you're a lot better at soliciting sponsor money than I am.
They want their products
not gonna
shown.
get that.
They
So-
don't want to give you cash.
Yeah. So we did both the Guam trip and the first polar attempt and the successful polar attempt without sponsors. We had some companies come to us after we had completed it and said, we'd like to participate, we'd like to put our name with that. And Camguard helped me out quite a bit, Continental Engines, but it was after we had done the trip. And here again, if you're looking for a sponsor to pay your way, it's not going to happen. They can help a little bit. give you maybe like I said, a headset or something like that. But I went to this kids seminar at Sun & Fun, after yours, and he talked about his world record being the youngest to go around the world, and what a fiasco. But somebody asked him how much did it cost, and he said $200 and some odd thousand. Wow, I've been around the world and actually set a record for a little more than 1/10 of that. Because I put in the homework. Rather, he apparently hired handlers and hired people to plan his flight and lay all the groundwork instead of doing the research himself. So not only did he spend a whole lot of extra money, but he lost the experience of doing that research and gaining the knowledge himself.
That's interesting. That's the first time I hear a statement that allows me to put a dollar value against the experience and the value of the team that supports you. On
and of course, our team was all volunteers.
Yeah. And there's no question that it's valuable, but often hard to quantify with a dollar figure.
That's right.
We've covered a lot. We've had a good breakfast.
Yeah, thank you.
Should we go into the airport and take a look at the plane?
Okay, sure.
All right.
And remember, you promised to make me better looking.
You will be blown away when you see the result.
All right, Bill, this is the famous Lancair. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
It's different in several ways. The main differences are the fuel system and the electrical systems are the primary differences. We, in order to get as much fuel as we could, and of course as you add fuel in the fuselage, it moves the center of gravity aft, so we did things like move the engine forward an inch to move the empty center of gravity forward. We, if you'll notice, there's no instruments on the right-hand side of the instrument panel. That's because there's a header tank from the instrument panel to the firewall on the right side, and all the aux tanks, including the wing tanks, feed that header tank. The engine runs only off the header tank. Right now, at the moment, it's in the two-place configuration, so there's a tank, 45-gallon tank in place of where the back seat would be, and another 10 gallons in the back seat footwell. Plus the 13-gallon header tank gives you 68 gallons additional fuel other than the 108 in the wings. We also built in SATCOM antenna into the tail and HF radio for oceanic communications, which you can see the little connector there on the bottom. The HF antenna attaches here and goes through a stabilizing standoff here where the tail tie down is, and then it's a 50 foot trailing wire antenna.
Okay, 50 foot.
Yeah.
How well does that work?
Works quite well. Works quite well. We've transmitted. I remember one time I was trying to get a hold of Atlantico HF, which is based down in southern South America, and I was trying them for a long time and couldn't get any reply. And way down there in the South Atlantic, and finally San Francisco came back and says, "This is San Francisco. Can we help you?" So that's halfway around the world it communicates.
All right, so up here and then stand on the wing?
Yeah. All right, then the right foot in onto the floor, kind of sit on the gunnels. Perfect.
That worked out okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let me see. This looks like a fairly conventional instrument panel.
Yeah, this is a
with
Grand Rapids here. Plus I have pretty much a 6-pack of standard instruments there too. Strike Finder, Garmin 80, GNS 80.
Yes.
And fairly standard stuff. Xeon for traffic. This is the main thing we did. This is the key to the fuel system right here. From here to the firewall, this is a header tank.
Ah, okay.
13.5 gallons with a sight gauge.
So you know exactly how much fuel.
Precisely. So a lot of people, you know, on the Guam to Jacksonville trip, they go, how much fuel did you land with? I said, 6 gallons. They go, oh my God, 6 gallons. If you have 6 gallons in the wing, you have no idea how much fuel you have. But when I have 6 gallons here, I know I have 6 usable gallons. So this will, you know, read accurately down to the quart.
Yes.
So this is really the key to the fuel system, is this header tank. And gravity flows to the engine from here. All the other tanks, the wing tanks, this is a back seat tank here. We have a back seat footwell tank. They all feed to this manifold underneath your seat at the low point in the fuel system through valves. They all gravity flow to that valve. And then from there, they're pumped up into the header tank. And there's 3 pumps. Here they are right here. These 3 pumps, only one of which you need. And each of those pumps is powered by a different electrical system. As you can see here, I have 3 separate and independent electrical systems, 3 batteries, 3 alternators, and they can be cross-tied in any combination. Plus I have the avionics runs on system 1 and 2 through Schottky diodes, and the essential bus runs on all 3 through Schottky diodes. So the fuel system and the electrical system are the main changes.
Have you had an electrical issue where you
None.
relied on the redundancy?
No. Good that it's there, but you know.
Even better to not need it.
Yeah, all 3 alternators have. If I was building it again today, I'm not sure I'd put 3 in. I think 2 would probably be enough. But when we were, you know, trying to design it for as failure-proof as possible, we thought 3 would be better.
Here's something in the panel that I don't recognize. What is this device?
That's a Grand Rapid EIS, Engine Information System. So all the sensors for CHT, EGT, and all that stuff feed to here, and then this feeds it to the Grand Rapids. What a lot of guys do is they'll take this unit and put it elsewhere where it's not visible and just read through here. But I liked it up here because before I get my avionics on, I can at least get oil pressure when I start the engine. You know, I can get the basics, RPM, oil pressure, oil temperature, and I can scroll through anything else I want.
Yeah.
So it's just engine stuff.
Is your SATCOM and HF integrated through the intercom?
Yes. Yes, and that was another thing we did that really makes it a lot easier. The HF is COM3. The SATCOM will Bluetooth through the headsets.
Okay.
However, on these oceanic trips, we did not use a lot of voice on the SATCOM. We found it much more efficient to use text.
Is that because of the cost of voice or the quality of voice?
Yeah, it's like if I was looking for weather, or if the ground crew thought I needed weather, they could simply cut and paste a TAF or a METAR into that, and boom, I'd have it on my iPad, rather than, you know, voice reading me the weather and me trying to copy it down, things like that. Also, every hour I filled out a status report that had 18 parameters. You know, oil temperature, fuel quantity, fuel used that hour, oil pressure, my blood oxygen and heart rate, cockpit temperature, all kinds of things. And every hour I'd send that to them. So I just fill out the form, and then I would simply write those numbers down on the text. And when they'd get it, they had the same blank form, and they could fill in the numbers.
See how that's easier.
A lot easier than voice.
Even though it's probably nice to hear a voice every now and then.
Yeah, and we did do some voice, but from a practical standpoint, the text was what we used the most. This, as you can see, but that's a 45-gallon tank in place of where the back seat normally is. And we take that tank out and put a back seat back in, but with this tank in, we built it at the same level as the rest of the baggage compartment, so I have 7 feet of flat space back here. So in the Expedition configuration, we had a 66-gallon drum here. I had a bulkhead forward of the baggage door to keep the second 66-gallon drum from shifting back, which would have been disastrous. And we filled that second drum up to only 33 gallons. In addition, there were tanks here where I'm sitting. There was no co-pilot seat, so this was all fuel up to about this level. No rudder pedals here, so it would be fuel all the way to the firewall here, and up to about this level here. And then on top of this fuel tank where I'm sitting, I had oxygen tanks and a lot of additional radios, additional GPSs and equipment. So it was filled with either fuel or stuff pretty much to the ceiling on those trips. And one thing we knew when we were constructing the airplane and doing all our plans, we knew we would have an airplane that had a pretty far aft CG. And we knew what the problems with that is as far as stability and control, performance, so on and so forth. And we took that into account, and when we did our testing, we really snuck up on it. We, added a little weight, checked out the flying features, added a little more weight very, very gradually. What we didn't anticipate, but we should have, is that the center of gravity was not only pretty far aft, making the airplane in that configuration with 361 gallons of fuel, ugly to fly, unstable, difficult to fly. But the CG, in addition to being aft, was also up. So that made it roll unstable. Yeah. So it was unstable in so many ways. It's ugly to fly for the first 4 or 5 hours, and you can't use the autopilot for several hours after takeoff, which is when you're busiest. So remember I mentioned earlier that these world records were not particularly fun. Right. That's one example of it being a lot of work. Those first 5 hours, it was all hand flying and an unstable airplane. Actually, I rarely put fuel in the wings. I always use this backseat tank. The two-place configuration is where it normally is, and it actually flies a little nicer with a slightly aft CG. Lowers the stall speed, makes it a little lighter on the elevators.
Do you ever get weird looks from line personnel when you tell them to put fuel in the fuselage?
Yeah, sometimes they already have the hose stretched out there to the wing tank, and I go, in here.
It's good.
Here, you got to get that. That was from Laszlo, the guy who has the company that builds the bladder tanks, Turtle Pack.
Yeah.
So I kept that up there to keep my sense of humor up.
Reminds me, my longest overwater flight was from South Florida to Key West. And nothing bad happened, of course, but you wonder if you have to ditch somewhere. Do you want to be eaten by alligators or sharks? Right?
No, you'd be picked up in 5 minutes by some guy in a fishing boat.
Probably, yeah.
And it's warm water.
Yeah.
We also, as obviously seen, is we did everything possible to keep the weight down. So no heavy interior. I mean, this is just trunk paint, Zolatone paint for interior, and Lowe's indoor-outdoor carpet, very, very light. So we didn't put a lot of weight in an interior or anything else that we could save weight on. So. Which is the way I like it. I'm perfectly happy with it like this.
Yeah.
And I told you that on this flight I figured out the secret of life, didn't I?
No.
No, I did.
You want to share it?
Oh, what is the secret of life?
Yes.
The secret of life is Velcro. As you can see, I've got Velcro all over the airplane. And this was very handy in that day or night. I had everything in a particular place, and I could reach and find my water bottle, and I could reach and find my pee bottle and not get them mixed up, and my food bag, clothes bag, paperwork, everything was Velcroed in, and we still use it, as you see here. We got pencils and pens and all kinds of stuff Velcroed on the instrument panel here.
Yeah.
So my theory is Velcro is the secret of life.
It works. It's lightweight and it's cheap.
There you go. This is Amundsen Scott Station at the South Pole, and this wingtip that you see here is that wingtip right there.
That's the route you flew?
This is the the route for the polar trip. Second attempt, only successful attempt. This is our vacation trip the following year that Sue and I did in the two-place configuration all over the Pacific. And this is partial list of interesting places that the airplane's been. This is usually when I go to fly-ins or something, I have a little display I put on the wing, but
That's pretty darn impressive.
and that's the one for distance.
Very nice. Congratulations. This is for navigation?
In the summer. Yeah, this is my map. This is my chart.
It's your movie map.
Yeah, right.
Does it serve any practical purpose? Or?
No, but you know, people ask, well, you know, where'd you fly? What route did you take? And it's a lot easier to show on this little globe than anything else. A lot of people, you tell them, well, I stopped in Punta Arenas, Chile. They go, where's that? You know.
Well, Bill, it's been fun learning about your airplane and your record missions.
Pleasure speaking with you, Martin.
Thank you for your time, and all the best for whatever comes next. And maybe in a few years we'll talk again, and you can fill us in on yet another adventure.
Maybe so.
Look forward to hear about it.
Thank you.
All the best.